much stronger back then. It's as if his heart is filled with terror.
Mohammed was released in exchange for Israeli hostages kidnapped by Hamas, one of the group's key goals in carrying out the attacks. Those attacks, Mohammed says, not only changed the lives of the Palestinian prisoners released, but those in Israeli jails.
That was Lucy Williamson. The world leaders are meeting in Dubai for the UN Climate Change Summit called COP28. Addressing the summit, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, said more radical action was needed to save the planet. He urged global leaders to act decisively to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures.
We cannot save a burning planet via fire holes of fossil fuels. We must accelerate a just, equitable transition to renewables. The science is clear. The 1.5 degree limit is only possible if we ultimately stop burning our fossil fuels. Not reduce, not abate, phase out with a clear time frame aligned with 1.5 degrees.
After that, in his address, King Charles III called for genuine transformational action.
I pray with all my heart that COP28 will be another critical turning point towards genuine transformational action at a time when already, as scientists have been warning for so long, we are seeing alarming tipping points being reached. I've spent a large proportion of my life trying to warn of the existential threats facing us over global warming, over climate change and biodiversity loss.
Earlier I spoke to the BBC's environment correspondent Matt McGrath, who's in Dubai, when I started by asking him what COP28 hopes to achieve.
The leaders will be here for today and tomorrow, and they will probably agree on a number of measures on climate change, such as perhaps the tripling of renewable energy and the doubling of energy efficiency by 2030, as well as probably putting in large amounts of money into various climate funds. King Charles's speech in the hall was at the very start of the leaders' segment, and it went down very well, I think, with the audience there. Obviously, kind of preaching to the converted, but he has a track record of speaking at these major events. He spoke before the Paris Agreement, and he mentioned it in his speech that he had given the opening address there, and that had turned to great success. He's hoping it can actually be repeated here as well. He painted a very stark picture of the impact of climate change on the world, saying that we're carrying out this vast, frightening experiment of changing all ecology and all nature all at once, and that our children, our grandchildren wouldn't judge us by our words in 2050. They'd judge us by what we're doing now. So it was a very clear message, a very strong message, and I think it really summed up some hope that things can be different, but also that the scale of climate change that the world is facing is particularly frightening.
You mentioned some of the funds and some of the money. We know that the UAE president has announced $30 billion worth of funding for global climate solutions, he said. These kind of funds, I guess they are very useful if that money does actually go on to properly tackle climate change.
Yeah, we don't really have very many details of what that fund will be and how it will work, but it's certainly, in terms of the scale, is probably something way bigger than people have heard of before in relation to finance. I understand it's going to work as an investment fund, and that it hopes to attract other investments totaling to about $250 billion by 2030. Now, it certainly is the type of money that developing nations say they need to cope with both the impacts of climate change and to help them to adapt and move away from fossil fuels. So I think it will be seen as in the right ballpark in terms of number, but how it's delivered, whether it's money that's given in the form of loans or whether it's given in the form of grants, that's a big issue. The smaller developing countries say we want help, but we don't want to be just burdening ourselves with extra loans to cope with the impacts of climate change, a problem we didn't start.
Matt McGrath in Dubai. An author whose book has triggered a row over allegations of racism within the royal family has said the naming of two royals in one edition was an error. Omid Scobie said he didn't know how a Dutch translation of Endgame included the names of King Charles and Catherine, Princess of Wales. And they're reported to have allegedly discussed the skin colour of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's unborn baby. Our royal correspondent Sean Coughlin is following the story and gave us the latest.
The publishers first of all said that there was a translation error, and everybody tried to
compare the Dutch version with the English text. And I suppose what was most striking was that there were additional lines, rather than lines that could have been, where there could have been some confusion about the vocabulary or about what was intended. You can't actually just put a name in and say that's a problem with translation. These are extra lines. And we know the author of the book, Omid Scobie, has been very clear that he had never submitted any version which included these names. He's been saying that through the week, several media interviews he's asserted that. He's also said very strongly this wasn't any sort of marketing stunt, which again raises the question, how did it happen? It's not at all clear yet. I think this is very much a live story. The publishers have yet to reveal their investigations, but how did it happen? How did it get there if the author didn't write it and the translator said it was there when she translated it? Where did it come from? Yeah, something's missing at this stage. And has the palace reacted to this publication yet? The indications have been that all options are open, which again kind of raises the prospect of legal action. But it's not at all simple, because initially there was a reluctance to publish the names in mainstream media, but it was all on social media. Where do you go? How do you put it back? How do you put the genie back in the lamp? The information's out there, so their options are quite limited as well. So I think they'll be waiting to see whether or not this investigation shows this was a mistake or a hack or perhaps a deliberate leak. I think they'll be waiting to see. And we mentioned already on the programme, King Charles is in Dubai. He spoke earlier on at COP28. Is this going to overshadow some of the comments that he made? I mean, I suppose he's one of those men. Well, the timing is excruciating, really, because there he is on perhaps one of the biggest days of his year, making a keynote speech in front of world leaders on a subject about which he feels passionately. But the papers at home are just full of stories about a race row and who said what to whom 2 years ago in a conversation which we don't really know about how it happened. And it's the sort of thing where he wants to appear like a serious, broadsheet monarch, and here he is, dragged down to the tabloids again, having to explain stuff, and not be able to in a way. How can he address this problem? And that's the awful thing in a way. And I don't know how he balances those two parts of his royal identity. And I guess just finally, now we wait to see what happens. I mean, that's the only thing we can do. Well, that's right. I mean, we just want to know, how does this happen? If we know more about that, and that depends upon the publishers telling us, then I think the story could move in lots of different directions. Our royal correspondent, Sean Coughlin. And this is Chris Barrow with the Newsroom. Still to come on this programme, after 2 weeks, the Constitutional Court in Madagascar has ruled on the outcome of the presidential election. Before that, though, a reminder of our main news so far. Israel has dropped leaflets urging Palestinians to evacuate from parts of southern Gaza after resuming its bombardment of the territory. World leaders at the UN Climate Conference in Dubai have, for the first time, signed a declaration recognising the role of food and farming in tackling global warming. And Japan has officially opened an experimental nuclear fusion reactor as part of a project with the EU to develop a clean source of energy. Next on the Newsroom, lured to Myanmar with the promise of good jobs and then forced into crime. That's what seems to have happened to more than 100 Malaysians who've now been repatriated. They were flown back via China. Our Asia-Pacific regional editor, Nikki Bristow, told us more.